Hello and welcome to World News Tonight here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Kyiv and Washington have reached agreement on a draft trade deal for Ukraine's rare earth minerals. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. What are rare earth minerals and why does Trump want them? Trump announces a gold card for wealthy immigrants as a pathway to citizenship. Romanian prosecutors open a probe of a pro-Russian presidential frontrunner. Ukraine and the US have apparently come to a potential deal regarding the development of Ukrainian rare earth mineral resources. President Zelenskyy has referred to it as a framework and that it does not include security guarantees. He's expected to visit President Trump in Washington to go through the details as soon as this Friday. Sasha Farbach reports.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is hoping to secure a deal with President Donald Trump, with a handshake and a meeting. Progress may be on the horizon, according to Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal.
This is a preliminary agreement that provides for further legal action, meaning the future creation of an investment fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine, where both Ukraine and the United States will manage and fill up this fund on equal footing.
The new proposed deal follows another previous iteration which sought around $500 billion from the Ukrainians in compensation for aid provided by Washington. Some experts have criticized the behavior of the Trump administration in the past weeks.
That was way too much. That was also too much, compared to any sum that the United States has ever given to Ukraine in terms of military assistance.
Somehow the Americans, after the Trump's inauguration, kidnapped the idea and changed it a lot and changed it into something that was unacceptable for the Ukrainian side.
The idea of access to precious minerals in Ukraine was initially proposed by President Zelenskyy in his 5-point victory plan of October 2024. After Trump was inaugurated, the Americans proposed what they called compensation for U.S. support and military aid of $500 billion, well over 4 times what Washington has provided to Ukraine. Turned down by Kyiv, a revised deal looks to be in the offing. Whatever the outcome of the agreement, the presence of Zelenskyy in the White House is a positive sign, according to experts.
It's important that these two gentlemen show they can get along. Otherwise, Russia will be the absolute winner. It still may, but for the moment, the big Ukrainian-US crisis has been averted.
The bilateral agreement also foresees a joint investment fund as well as a joint reconstruction effort for Ukraine. Although it comes at a significant moment, we will see in the coming days whether it will be enough for Trump and Zelenskyy to see eye to eye and end on a positive handshake. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
And now for reactions from Kyiv, we have Oz Kataji, our Ukraine correspondent. Good evening, Oz. How is this news being received in Kyiv?
Good evening, Ashim. Well, President Zelenskyy saying a few things in the press conference that are quite stand out. The one being that there was initially a 2-to-1 ratio agreement, which would mean that Ukraine had to pay back $2 for every $1 that the US invested in Ukraine as part of the agreement. That was gone. Zelenskyy pointed that out as one of the key things that they didn't want to sign in the agreement. The other important point that Zelenskyy stressed was that Ukraine won't be assuming debt under this agreement. That was a big worry, not just for Kyiv, but also Kyiv's partners in Europe, who were worried that Ukraine would be saddled with this huge debt, a larger debt than was imposed on the Germans after the First World War. So this was, again, something that Kyiv wasn't interested in signing. So Kyiv feels this is a deal that it's in their interest to sign with the United States for long-term investment. As Sasha pointed out in the previous package, the reason that this was part of what Ukraine had offered in October 2024 as part of their peace plan. So This is something the Ukrainians are very comfortable talking about and committing to. But again, the devil is in those details, and the fact that security guarantees aren't written in to this contract were again pointed out by Zelensky. And this is something that the Ukrainians feel very strongly about. Security guarantees are the biggest issue for them. It's all well and good talking about future mineral prospects, but when the country is still at war, that's very difficult to envisage a future in which those prospects are able to be mined, particularly when some of these areas that we're talking about are under Russian occupation. So really, that's the important bit that is still not really discussed in this agreement, and will be the focus of much of the attention of Ukraine's part of the discussions going forward in the weeks and months to come.
Understood. So much to be thrashed out there between the parties. Oz Chatterjee, thank you very much for that update, and stay safe. The wealth of rare earth ores and raw materials sitting beneath Ukrainian soil on both sides of the front line is enormous. The World Economic Forum says the country is a top 10 global supplier of mineral resources, holding around 5% of the world's total supply. Experts say US access to these resources could prove vital for America in its race against China for raw materials, as John Todd now reports.
Blasts behind the battle lines, explosions aimed at enriching Ukrainians, not maiming them. The country is mineral rich. The UN and World Economic Forum say around 5% of globally critical rare earth raw materials are within the country's pre-invasion borders. Analysts say access to these could prove vital to Washington in its race with Beijing for raw materials.
This is in a very best interest of the United States to have such kind of an ally who has a crucial amount of rare earth minerals, which are very important for all kind of industries, especially new technologies, which are the basis of American development.
Ukraine is home to a third of Europe's lithium deposits, the essential element in current batteries. Before the war, Ukraine provided 7% of the global titanium supply, used in air, space and defence industries. There are also 19 million tonnes of proven graphite reserves, key for manufacturing electric vehicle batteries. Experts say Ukraine is well placed to exploit these deposits.
Ukraine also has good industrial foundations. They have personnel, both engineers and trained workers. The Ukrainian working class knows what they are doing, and they know how to do it well.
Tests carried out at this mine in central Ukraine show its graphite can be used for graphene, a form of carbon employed in nanotechnology. It's crying out for investment.
Without stimulations, without investments, without support, we will stay countrymen who are producing Rolls-Royce in a garage.
Commentators say mineral extraction will likely prove challenging without security guarantees.
Someone needs to provide security guarantees, or else no one will invest in Ukraine. No companies will come here, unless the countries involved provide some sort of investment security.
Without funding and protection, Ukraine's rare minerals will remain buried beneath its soil.
US President Donald Trump has once again stunned reporters gathered in the Oval Office by announcing a golden card scheme for wealthy foreigners, including Russian oligarchs. The scheme is essentially going to be a ticket to US citizenship for anyone willing to hand over $5 million. And it is not the first time the US leader has engaged with shady Russian businessmen. Kazimierz Wysiak reports.
Another day and yet another eyebrow raiser from US President Donald Trump.
We're going to be selling a gold card. You have a green card, this is a gold card. We're going to be putting a price on that card of about $5 million, and that's going to give you green card privileges plus. It's going to be a route to citizenship, and wealthy people will be coming into our country by buying this card.
But the US leader didn't stop there. Asked by reporters whether Russian oligarchs could purchase the card, Trump welcomed that option with a smile.
Yeah, possibly. Hey, I know some Russian oligarchs that are very nice people. It's possible. They're not quite as wealthy as they used to be. They're not as wealthy as they used to be. I think they can afford $5 million.
While Trump framed the answer as a joke, the concept of Russian oligarchs essentially buying US citizenship is no laughing matter, especially since, contrary to what Trump painted it to be, $5 million is a very low price for many of these shady businessmen. This is a $500 million luxury yacht owned by Russian oligarch Alexei Moldashov, anchored in the Seychelles. The footage was provided exclusively to TVP World by Marek Waszczuk, a Polish captain who happened to be sailing by.
You could see just how expensive and luxurious this yacht was by the sheer number of decks, helicopter landing pads and the like. We sailed a little closer and saw the name. After a quick internet search, we learned it belonged to Russia's wealthiest oligarch, Alexei Mordashov. It cost $50 million annually just to keep this thing running.
For many of these Russian oligarchs, dishing out $5 million on US citizenship would be like spending pennies. According to one expert, the scheme is basically like extending a helping hand to hardened foreign criminals.
So we shouldn't even be talking about a gold card for any Russian businessman under sanctions. You should be addressing the fundamental here is this person, through their support of the invasion of Ukraine, is beyond that. When Donald Trump says they can get a gold card, he's making them normal.
So, who could be these nice Russian oligarchs that Trump is referring to? We don't have to look far to find some examples. In 2019, during his previous term, Trump lifted sanctions against 3 major Russian companies linked to Oleg Deripaska, Vladimir Putin's close ally. That same oligarch has just been hit by the EU's 16th sanctions package aimed at Russian businessmen who support the invasion of Ukraine. Here he is, listening to Vladimir Putin calling for more investments in Russia to save the economy hurt by Western sanctions. Will he be among the first golden ticket beneficiaries? The US Commerce Secretary promises a thorough vetting process.
We're going to make sure they're wonderful, world-class global citizens.
But it's not clear what exactly that means. President Trump's gold card will go on sale as early as in 2 weeks, coinciding with the ongoing negotiations on the end of the war in Ukraine. Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
The EU has unveiled its Clean Industrial Deal with plans to cut energy costs and invest over €100 billion to support EU-made clean manufacturing. The deal is meant to increase Europe's competitiveness. Sonia Agata-Biscan has more.
Europe is grappling with rising geopolitical tensions, slow economic growth, and technological competition. These lines are taken directly from the deal presented by the European Commission on Wednesday. The Clean Industrial Deal is intended to tackle these challenges.
We think that the Clean Industrial Deal is Europe's business plan to tackle the climate crisis, boost the competitiveness, ensure the economic resilience, and retain talent.
This is a communication, so in fact it's not a legal binding document, but it shows this political will to have still a competitive industry sector.
The deal focuses on cutting energy costs, boosting demand for clean products, and financing the clean transition. The overarching goals: increasing Europe's competitiveness and decarbonization in the EU.
The one thing that makes Europe less competitive than the US, less competitive than China, is the energy prices that has to go into industry. And so it's good to see that the Commission's really taking concerted action.
In the past, decarbonization was predominantly associated with climate concerns. This deal ties it with competitiveness.
Our dependency on importing fossil fuels, previously from Russia, now from the US and other global partners, that this is causing competitiveness problems. And we're spending hundreds of billions of euros to producers outside of Europe. So the linking of decarbonisation with competitiveness, I think, is the right approach.
Looking at energy generation costs, competitiveness in Europe could also be achieved through playing the strengths that the EU already has.
So we have to focus on the industries where we are already strong, the clean industries, where Europe already has a very strong position, such as in wind, such as in heat pump manufacturing.
The clean industrial deal includes over 100 billion euro to support EU-made clean manufacturing, and through an ambitious framework, Europe aspires to become a decarbonized economy by 2050.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk took part in emergency online crisis talks this morning, aimed at solidifying the continent's position on Ukraine-Russia ceasefire talks. While much of this video call is under wraps for now, it is thought that the leaders hammered out the bloc's support for Kyiv, as well as how to handle US President Donald Trump. EU correspondent Angela Skuyens reports from Brussels.
United and in solidarity, we will find a good way to end this war. These comments belong to Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and were posted online following an emergency video conference between European leaders. That Polish Prime Minister was a part of these confidential 30-minute dialogue, which was brokered by European Council President Antonio Costa. While much of this discussion is under wraps for now, we do know that the thrust of this dialogue was to ensure that European leaders were on the same page regarding the rapid-fire developments of the Ukraine and Russia ceasefire negotiations, as well as simmering transatlantic tensions between Washington and Brussels. We're particularly talking about those tariffs, as well as questions regarding the continental security architecture. But our leaders also met online today to hammer out the agenda for an emergency European Council summit scheduled for next week, where European defensive needs sit at the top of that docket, as well as Ukrainian defence. But the rhetoric that we're hearing from European leaders here today is a lot of promises. The European Commission has promised to give Ukraine 3.5 billion euros. We're expecting that Ukraine will use this money to shore up more military equipment. The EU top foreign policy chief Kai Kallas also says that European leaders will next week finalise a military package which will help Ukraine on the battlefield in the skies. The aim of this is to strengthen Kyiv at the negotiating table with Russia. We know that French President Emmanuel Macron was in Washington yesterday, where he reiterated Europe's position for more security guarantees to make sure the Kremlin will not exploit a loophole in these ceasefire negotiations. But according to media reports, that 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, was keen to emphasise his desire to close these ceasefire talks. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
The far-right populist candidate for Romanian President Călin Georgescu has been taken into police custody for questioning. The prosecution charged Georgescu with 6 counts and has launched a criminal investigation, but chose not to arrest the candidate. Franciszek Pilic has more.
Călin Georgescu, a man whose rise to political fame came seemingly overnight, has been brought in for questioning by the police. He is accused by the prosecution of committing acts against the constitutional order and involvement in an extremist organization.
It looks like Bucharest is looking to block Georgescu's candidacy in the upcoming elections, despite signals from the Trump administration and Trump's associates, especially J.D. Vance, to not do so.
According to Romanian media, he was on his way to submit his candidacy for the next presidential election, scheduled for May this year.
The communist Bolshevik system continues its heinous abuses. Today at 6 o'clock in the morning, they descended again on dozens of locations, targeting families, waking children from their sleep. They are trying to fabricate evidence to justify stealing the election and do anything to block another presidential run of mine. Searched for 3 months without success.
After placing close to dead last in polls prior to the first round of the presidential elections, Călin Georgescu went on to win the vote, positioning himself to win the presidency. That was until the former president of Romania, Klaus Iohannis, declassified intelligence documents that suggested that Georgescu was backed by Russia, prompting the Romanian Constitutional Court to annul the elections. The move sparked controversy both among Georgescu supporters as well as international onlookers like the US Vice President J.D. Vance, who questioned Europe's democratic values at the Munich Security Conference.
Now we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections.
Two Romanian right-wing populist parties have announced they will gather their supporters and head to the prosecutor's office to protest Georgescu's detention, painting a picture of divide and discord ahead of the May vote.
The geopolitical dynamic across Europe has not been this uncertain in decades. From Germany's likely shift on nuclear deterrence to President Trump's transactional approach to Ukraine and Serbian nationalism in Bosnia, all taking place with the backdrop of Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, stability seems a long way away. What should we expect to see when the dust settles? Well, to make sense of this jigsaw, I'm joined by Jarosław Ćwiek-Karpowicz, Director, Polish Institute of International Affairs. Jarosław, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's a pleasure, of course. Now, let's start with US in the United Nations and the fact that there have been two motions and the US has not allowed Russia to be criticized in either of them. One was in the General Assembly and one was in the Security Council about the war in Ukraine. Your comments?
Well, if we compare the US decision to the last years, definitely we may say that it's shocking. It's like completely against what US position was a few years ago. But if we compare it to Trump's statements, especially during US election, I think it's quite logical. I mean, his attitude towards UN system, let's say, and the position of United States is quite obvious that he's very critical, that he thinks that US should be much more, let's say, independent from the international pressure, that definitely if US may play some role, leading role in this system, there should be immediately some benefits. And here we see that in this, let's say, pre-ceasefire stage, when the United States is collecting position or, let's say, the lines of Ukraine and Russia, US now is playing a role as a so-called advocate of Russia, but definitely it's temporary. It's like now we may hear from every single official, Trump's, let's say, a supporter that, well, Russia is not the bad guy, that the situation is complex, just to make impression that US may play a role of mediator between Russia and Ukraine, and we don't know if indeed US is in favor of Ukraine. But of course, we know that for Russia, Ukraine is much more, let's say, not important, but may give more benefits for US economy, for US political interest than Russia, which from many years, decades and ages was a first enemy or advisor. Not advisor, but
Understood. So if I understand you correctly, Jarosław, you're saying this is basically a negotiation tactic that Trump is using to place itself or place the US in a position of mediator. But it's a temporary stage, and eventually, do you think Putin believes him?
Partly. I mean, because it's a temporary stage, let's say, but the effects can be very long. Like, for example, in the future, Russia or another countries may use this argument that look, the UN system is not credible. Even the United States behave like that. So that's why, I mean, Russia is collecting all these statements made by Trump, and probably will use it in the future. But in the short perspective, in the short-term perspective, let's say that this is an element of Trump's tactic, and definitely Putin is not a stupid guy, and probably would demand something more from Ukraine and countries which support Ukraine than only a changing of rhetoric.
Understood.
Definitely.
So staying with Ukraine and what Russia may demand, it looks as though we've got a framework agreement where there's going to be US investment in Ukrainian mineral resources and so on. And that's good for the US as well in terms of its geopolitical source of supply of those rare earth metals. How is Russia feeling about that? Because one can imagine Putin saying, well, if they're going to invest so much in those resources, they're going to want to protect them. What does that mean? What do you think is going through Putin's head about protecting the US investment in Ukraine?
Definitely this idea that the US may make a deal with Ukraine over the controlling the critical raw materials it's not good for Russia, definitely. And it's important to underline that the first let's say proposal on the idea was created or formulated by Ukraine itself. So it's not United States, but rather Ukraine who first say that if you want something just to have for your benefits, and just we may offer you our materials. But I think that yesterday or the day before, Putin immediately said, look, in Russia we have so many critical raw materials that we may also make some kind of a deal. So it's like it's a mixture of some ignoration that, it's one of a deal which is not very important. Because, look, definitely US would like to have something in Ukraine, but we are pretty much far away from the ceasefire or even the peace treaty, right? We still have the front line and two armies which are quite well equipped and quite advanced in the conflict. And it's not so easy, especially regarding the potential of Russia and Ukraine, which also is trying to be self-dependent and to produce a weaponry which is needed just to stabilize the front line.
Right.
So, in my perspective, it's not so obvious the ceasefire is achievable in a very short perspective. Yeah.
Understood. But it's interesting. I was actually looking through this framework agreement, and one of the things that comes across quite strongly is that the US is invested in Ukrainian independence and security. Those words or similar are used a number of times in that agreement. What do you think that might mean?
I mean, it's only words, because what does it mean, independence and sovereignty? Also, what Putin is proposing to Ukraine is also so-called independence, but we know that according to Russia, independence is something different than what Ukraine has in its mind. So that's why it's relatively easy to say that we support your independence, but there is probably nothing about sovereignty or control of borders before 2014. So, it's not, for me, it's completely not surprising. The language is not very precise.
Not precise enough.
What precise enough.
So do you think Zelensky will get the security guarantees? I mean, they're supposed to be meeting on Friday in Washington, Trump and Zelensky. What do you expect the outcome of that to be?
I think it's just a first step of, let's say, Ukraine's plan to engage US more. I think it's something similar what Central Europe did in the beginning of 90s, that we also wanted to have as many US investments on our soil as it possible. So that's why US economic engagement in Ukraine is just the beginning of the, let's say, more closer relations. And then probably it will be much easier to have another, let's say, demands. Because if, let's imagine the US has indeed control over some particular factories or places where the critical raw minerals would be extracted.
And mining, yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Immediately, maybe there will be also some US private companies, armies, people who would be engaged in the security of this area.
Right.
So definitely it would be
something will be necessary. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you very much for sharing that analysis with our audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
And that's all from us in this episode of World News Tonight. Goodbye.